You ever wonder what actually stops the government from just doing whatever it wants? Well, it's not just some polite agreement, it's a real, powerful, legal document. Today, we're going to break down the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we're not going to treat it like some dusty old text, but as what it really is, a vital, personal tool that belongs to you. So let's just start with the most basic question of all. When the government passes a new law or a police officer makes a choice that affects you directly, what actually stops them from going too far? What's the real barrier between you and the full force of their authority? The answer is, well, it's a shield. Honestly, the best way to think about the Charter is as your personal shield. It was designed specifically to protect your individual rights and your freedoms from being trampled on by the government. It's the supreme law of Canada, which means any other law that conflicts with it can just be struck down. Gone. Okay, so over the next few minutes, we're going to put this shield to the test. First, we'll look at who it actually defends you from. Then we'll figure out who gets to hold it. We'll take a tour of your rights, then look at its limits, and finally, we'll see what happens when those rights actually get broken. All right, first things first, and this is the one thing that almost everyone gets wrong. Your charter is a shield against the government. I'll say it again, only the government. Understanding that single distinction is the key to, well, everything else we're about to talk about. So think of it this way. If a police officer wants to search your car or a public school board suspends your kid, yeah, you can raise your charter shield. But if your boss at a private company fires you or your local coffee shop won't serve you, the charter doesn't apply. For those kinds of situations, you need a whole different set of laws, like provincial human rights code. So how do the courts figure this all out? Well, they follow a pretty simple rule, and here it is. They scrutinize the quality of the act, not the actor. In other words, they don't really care if an organization calls itself private. If it's doing something that is fundamentally a government job, like, say, a private company running a prison, then for that specific act, your charter shield is up. Okay, so now we know who the shield works against. The next logical question is, who gets to hold it? Is this just for Canadian citizens, or does it protect everyone inside our borders? For the most part, the answer is simple. It's everyone. If you are physically in Canada, doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not, you are protected by fundamental rights like freedom of speech. But the shield does have some specific rules. The right to vote? Yeah, that one's just for citizens. And what about a huge company? Can it use the charter? Well, kinda. They can claim freedom of expression for their advertising, but they obviously don't have a right to life. So we know the rules of the game. Now let's take a look at the toolkit itself. What exactly does this shield of yours protect? Let's go on a quick tour of your fundamental rights. First up, we've got the Big Four, the fundamental freedoms. These are the absolute cornerstones of a democracy. It's your right to believe what you want, your freedom to say what you think, to protest peacefully, and to hang out with whoever you want. Seriously, without these, nothing else really matters. Next up are the rights that are pretty much always in the headlines. Section 7, your right to life, liberty, and security is huge. It's been at the center of debates on everything from assisted dying to public health rules. Section 8, that's your core right to privacy against the state, unreasonable searches. And Section 15 is your incredibly powerful guarantee of equality, the one that fights discrimination. And rounding out our tour, there are 3 more big categories. Mobility rights, your freedom as a citizen to live and work in any province you choose. Democratic rights, the basic ability to vote and help pick your government. And finally, language rights, which make sure English and French have official status across the country. So you have this incredibly powerful shield. It protects all these things we just talked about. But, and this is a huge but, there's a critical catch. Your rights are not absolute. The Charter actually has a built-in escape hatch that lets the government legally limit them. This is Section 1, the Reasonable Limits Clause, and it's where the Charter's big balancing act comes into play. It says the government can limit a right, but they have to clear a really high bar. The limit has to be reasonable, it has to be written into law, and they have to prove to a court that it's demonstrably justified. And here's the key. The burden of proof is 100% on the government. So, to justify limiting your rights, the government has to pass something called the Oakes test. Think of it as 2 big hurdles. First, is their goal even important enough to be thinking about limiting a right in the first place? If they clear that, they move to the second hurdle, proportionality. This is where they have to prove they used a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. The law has to be directly connected to the goal, it must harm the right as little as humanly possible, and overall, the good it does has to outweigh the bad. But what happens if a government wants to pass a law that they know violates the Charter, a law they know will fail that Oakes test? Is there some kind of political get-out-of-jail-free card they can play? Well, yes, there is. It's the very controversial Section 33, the notwithstanding clause. This lets a government just declare that a law will operate in spite of the fact that it violates key charter rights. It's a temporary override, it expires after 5 years, and politically, it's a huge gamble. While some provinces have used it, the federal government has never ever touched it. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important question. When the government crosses the line, when it fails the Oakes test, and when it hasn't used its override, what happens then? How do the courts actually make things right? The courts basically have two main toolkits. The first is to fix the law for everybody. They can strike it down completely, just erase it from the books. Or they can perform a kind of legal surgery, reading in new words to make it constitutional. The second toolkit is to fix the situation just for the person who was affected. This could be anything from ordering the government to pay them money to throwing out critical evidence in a criminal trial if it was gathered illegally. And that number 2 is so important. It represents the dual power of the charter. See, it's not just about winning your individual case. It's about the power to actually reshape the law for the entire country. A single person's fight can trigger a systemic change that affects millions. That two-pronged approach is what makes the charter so incredibly powerful. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The charter isn't just some piece of paper. It's a dynamic, powerful shield. But like any powerful tool, you gotta know how it works. You need to know its rules, its built-in limits, and most importantly, what you can do when those limits are broken. The thing is, the charter is never really finished. It's a living document that's constantly being tested and reinterpreted to face new challenges. And that leaves us with one final urgent question. In our world of artificial intelligence, online speech, and all these new social frontiers, which one of our fundamental rights is going to be the next battleground?